So welcome back to our guests who are joining us for our third podcast. We actually have a few historical podcasts as well. This podcast has a unique piece to it. So this is the third in the series of podcasts which are recapping our district annual meeting, required each year, probably why they call it an annual meeting, in October. And our first two podcasts, we talked with elementary principal Terry Hendricks about our academic goals and outcomes, and then recently talked with high school principal Josh Cole about co-ops and YA experiences. And now we get to move to really what is one of the primary responsibilities of a public school district's annual meeting, and that's budget and finance. So I have joining me our Director of Human Resources and Finance, Kris. Kris, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
So we're taping this before Thanksgiving, and I think a good way to start would be just to share that many of the things we talk about at the annual meeting during our State of the District update are things for which we don't want to take them for granted. We have a lot to be thankful for. I think about just the annual meeting itself being a key part of a school board's year, and certainly are thankful. Our school board has over 104 years of experience, so that's certainly unique. The community support, Josh had talked about our soccer championship and state cross-country reps, Shrek the Musical. I want to highlight the fact that our Veterans Day program, I'm not sure there's a more powerful day in our annual calendar, and you have a pretty big role in helping make that happen along with our fifth grade team. Just talk a little bit about what that means to you, what it means to our community, that we can recognize our veterans with our younger children.
I have for the last several years led up our student council team from the high school, and that has been a service project that we have taken on. We do serve a breakfast before the Veterans Day program in the elementary school, and it has been such a blessing to me. It has nothing to do with finance. It gets me out and about with kids, which is why I'm not in a bank anymore. I love spending my time using my skill set with finance and numbers, but applying it in a setting where I get to hang out with kids, which is my passion. My skill versus my passion. And part of that is that breakfast for the veterans. And this is the first year, as long as I can remember, we had the highest number of veterans involved this year. We served breakfast to 74 fine young men and women who have served our country, and it's just a small piece of gratitude that we can give back to them for the just incredible amounts of service they've given to our country. So it's one of my favorite days at school each year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And being able to be a part of that, and an important reminder for particularly our elementary school students to be a part of that celebration. A shout out to Ann Hand and Mel Tempest, Aaron Huffman. Our fifth grade team plays a key role this year. Our new student council advisor, Michelle Addy, was heavily involved, and I think they each share. There's a lot of pieces to making this happen in a way that really is honoring, but they certainly share your passion and interest in doing this well.
It's so important for the kids to see that too, our high school kids. I always have greeters, if you will, standing by the doors, meeting the veterans as they come in the program, and it's important to get them, those men and women have given up so much for us, and a little token of gratitude back to them by the kids. It's good for them to understand the relevance of how important that day is and celebrating that contribution, and that they can give a portion of their day to give back. And I oftentimes I'll tell them, try to get them to tell you a story or right. Some significance of what role they played or how, just an impact so that legacy can live on.
Two things stand out as I participate in that day. One is we have 470 elementary kids, kindergarten through fifth grade, in our gymnasium. And when our veterans walk into the gym and they all stand and express their appreciation with clapping, it's pretty emotional each year.
It brings tears to my eyes every year. And every year I think, okay, get a grip, Kris. You can take care. You can handle this. And every year I get tears. That and when they sing the song "Thank You" and all those voices are singing the same chorus, it gets me every year.
And the second piece that really is connected to that, the idea of having 460 elementary school students that are attentive and focused and respectful for a program that's usually about an hour is really, that's unique.
Going all the way down to 4-year-olds. That's hard to keep them.
Yeah, so definitely one of another highlight and such an important example of something that I'm thankful for in our community. And we're going to have more opportunities. Part of the Veterans Day program includes our choirs and our jazz band, and certainly with the holiday seasons approaching, there will be concerts and things coming up that we hope our community can continue to support them. So transitioning to the actual annual meeting, focus of the podcast on budget and finance, it's a primary responsibility of our school board, as I mentioned earlier, to set the budget. And when we think about our efforts to communicate with our stakeholders, you and I partnered along with Lucas Allen to have several Facebook Lives in past years in advance of the local tax bills coming out in an attempt to provide some clarity to something that is very complex. It has a lot of pieces to it, and in some ways I think it's fair to say areas that don't have the transparency that we think are necessary. So this podcast is our hope to take something pretty complicated and break it down into pieces that may be helpful as our community attempts to understand how their tax bill connects to the activity at an annual meeting of the school board. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. Yep. So why don't we start out? Can you give us a big picture overview, kind of school finance 101 for the average community member, focusing mainly on revenue sources as they anticipate their tax bills?
Okay. School finance is different than the other businesses that I've worked for before my career here, in that we have a system called fund accounting. So each fund takes care of a different department, if you will, of the big function of our school. For instance, we have a community recreation fund. We have a hot lunch fund that runs the whole hot lunch program for the district. The funds that we're going to talk about in our discussion today is our general fund and our special education fund, really the ones that are focused on what we primarily do here. The other ones are kind of ancillary funds, if you will. Each of those funds has its own income statement and balance sheet, and so they kind of function as their own business. The revenue sources in the funds that we're talking about, the ones that educate our kids, the primary sources of revenue that school districts get are aid from the state, which is called equalization aid, and property taxes. There are some other revenue sources, like we had a great basketball game last night that took in some gate income. We have some open enrollment revenue. We have some other federal sources, small pots. The vast majority of that is made up of those two sources, state aid and property taxes.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful. And when we think about, you mentioned a word, equalization aid, I think it's important for our community to understand the meaning behind that word, or at least what the attempt of equalization aid is. Could you maybe using an example of like the difference between Kohler and Elkhart Lake and Oostburg, talk a little bit about equalization aid and how it works in school funding?
So when that formula was originally developed, however long ago it was, long before I was a business manager in a school district, the attempt was to make an equal education opportunity for all the kiddos in the state of Wisconsin, regardless of how rich or poor a community that a student lives in. So the way they determine that is by the property tax value in your district divided by the number of kids that are in your district. That's the equalized value per member is what we call that. So in a district that's very property rich and doesn't have a lot of children in it.
A Whitefish Bay, a Kohler.
Kohler, Elkhart Lake. They have a lot of property value behind each kid, and so they don't get a lot of state aid. Those communities have to rely more on property taxes to fund that big piece of pie. Whereas in a district that's very low property rich, the poorer communities, from a property perspective, this doesn't have anything to do with your income level. It's all property wealth. If you have a lot of kids, like in the Milwaukee Public School, you have lots and lots of kids. There's less property value for each kid. So then they get a higher percentage of their budget is covered by state aid because there's less property value behind each child.
So it's really, in summary, the property, homes, businesses, all of those things, the more value there is in an assessment of what, my house is worth, your house, of what a business, Dutchland Plastics, Masters Gallery, and the more property wealth there is, if I'm hearing correctly, the less state aid that community.
Right.
The local taxpayers
Right.
cover more of that. So where does Oostburg land comparatively, just in general terms?
Pretty much in the middle of the pack.
Okay.
We're aided more heavily, slightly more heavily in equalization aid than property taxes, just over the 50% line, 55, 57-ish percent.
So roughly, it's about 50-50. Half of our revenue comes from the state through state budget decisions. The other half comes through our local tax levy. The line on our tax bills, I believe it says Oostburg Schools.
Correct.
And
Correct.
there's a bunch of pieces to that, but that's where our revenue comes from.
And if there was a bunch of building in Oostburg proper, our value would go up per member, which means the state would pull more money away from us and rely on that new property wealth
Right.
to cover that in our in their property taxes.
So I think that there's a couple of things that may be helpful for our listeners as they're looking at their tax bill. Again, those are going to hit the mailboxes soon if they aren't already here. There's a line that says Oostburg Schools. It's a significant portion of district residents' tax bills. And those tax bills, when people make their payments, that represents about half of the Oostburg School District's revenue. The other half comes from the state. For a district like Kohler, is it fair to say that state budget decisions around school funding maybe are less significant because they don't get much state funding?
Correct. Much less relevant to them because their pot of state aid is so small that even a large percentage decrease for them is still not a lot of money.
Right. I think that's important. And obviously there are other pieces we could get into, details around things like revenue limit and so on, that I think are important, but less significant to understanding your tax bill, at least right now. So let's jump into it, because this tax bill, when our school board met in this room without all the decorations, and they approved the school district's annual budget, it had a local levy increase of 6.15%. So our taxpayers, well, hearing that, they may assume, first of all, that does that mean my taxes for Oostburg School Line are going to go up 6.15%? Without getting in too much detail, can you give like a simple answer of, nah, it's not really true?
It is not really necessarily true. I mean, you might come close to that, but we have 7 different municipalities that we charge a property tax levy to. The town of Linden, the town of Lima, the town of Sherman, they all take a portion of all those municipalities are in our district, so they get assessed a portion too. So if the property in the town of Linden goes up substantially and not in a different community, it might affect those two differently.
Well,
so it's hard with 7 different municipalities for that to get stretched. It really is dependent on growth in one area versus growth in another.
Growth, or what we experienced a few years ago, if I'm correct, Oostburg went through a reassessment after not having been reassessed for a long period of time.
And that can cause a huge impact.
And it did for some of our Oostburg residents. Their school and overall property taxes went up significantly more than, for example, I live in town of Lima, where we had reassessed more frequently. and I didn't see as big of a dip. So what is the reason that this year is so different? How do we help a community member understand that?
There's a couple different factors that play into that, but the largest one is the fact that now when I talked about revenues before, I said there are some ancillary revenues that are outside of those two big pots we talked about. The two big pots being equalization or state aid and property taxes, those two combined together we call the revenue limit, all right? And each year the government or the budget will say, Oostburg School District or all school districts in the state, we're going to increase your revenue limit per child by a certain dollar amount. And each year in the budget, they say the state equalization aid will cover a portion of that in the 50-ish, 55% range, and the property taxpayers have to cover the rest. So this year, the Oostburg budget, all kids in the state of Wisconsin, we could increase our revenue by $325 per student. The difference this year is the government said, we're not going to put any of that money in the budget. So all of that has to get passed on to your property taxpayers in the communities that you live. So that the increase was not remarkable, outside of normal. But the fact,
our local budget increase.
The actual, correct. The amount we can add per student was not out of the ordinary. What was out of the ordinary this year is our budget said, we're not going to cover any of it from a state perspective. Your property taxpayers have to cover all of it.
When you said our budget, you mean the state budget?
The state budget isn't going to cover any of it. Your property taxpayers have to cover all of it.
So the legislature and the governor
correct
approved a budget that for the first time in
I think 15 years,
a substantial amount of time,
a long time,
included no additional money in general equalization aid.
Correct.
In the big pot of money.
Correct.
There was, we just want to make sure we're transparent, there were some pieces of the budget that provided additional revenue in open enrollment.
Yes.
We could have a long debate about whether it actually provided additional money in special education, at least money that we're going to see.
Correct.
All right. So as our listeners can see, it is very easy to quickly get into complexities. Let's see if I can summarize what I heard you say. This year, so 6.15% local levy increase approved by our school board. That's a significant outlier. Our expenses really aren't out of the norm. They're traditional. Mm-hmm. What's one of the differences is a decision by our governor and by the legislature to approve a budget that did not increase. And I know there are a couple other pieces. What are one or two other key factors that go into that abnormally high local levy increase this year?
So the next biggest piece probably is the fact that in the state budget, they allot a certain amount of money. This is the amount of money that goes into the pool for state aid for all the 421 districts in the state of Wisconsin. And then we go back to that formula that we talked about. How much equalized value do you have behind each kid? And they reassess that and say, well, Oostburg, your property values in your community in all 7 of those municipalities went up by 14%. But that community over there, they only went up 10% or 8%. So we're going to take some of your aid away and we're going to give it to them. So not only did the pie get a little bit bigger and the state's not helping with that, they also took money from what we had last year. Our state aid last year is $485,000 more than it is this year. So we have to, so that
$485,000 less. Not more.
Yeah, right. So that has to go to the taxpayers too, because now you're a little bit more wealthy than that community over here. So we're gonna share some of your money over there.
Right. So in simple terms, the property values in the Oostburg School District increased at a greater rate than other areas. Mm-hmm. So now we receive less of the pot of money.
Correct.
The second thing that you just talked about was the state also, for the first time in a very long time, did not add any additional money to offset local taxpayer contributions.
Correct.
Okay.
Those are the two biggest pieces.
Okay. So the third factor that has been part of our discussions in relation to the 6.15% increase.
The third largest, and really there's three fundamental reasons why the property tax levy is going up this. Those two that we talked about, the third one is vouchers. The vouchers are completely funded by property taxes in the district where the student who applies for a voucher lives. The property taxpayers are paying for that. Now, it's kind of a robbing Peter to pay Paul, maybe, if you would say. The taxes come to the public school, and then the public schools has to give that money to the private schools. We don't ever touch the money. It goes right through DPI, takes care of all that funding. But in essence, the voucher money is a complete property tax driven category. And so the dollar amount that the voucher schools increased in their per pupil funding for this year went up more than what ours did. And so that is also going to get put on the tax levy.
Okay, so I think there's a couple of things that I feel are important to talk about. First of all, when we engage in a discussion about vouchers, private schools, public schools, home schools, all the different opportunities that our families have, public school open enrollment and choice, that can be a sensitive topic. And I think it's important that I just share that our goal here is not to engage in a discussion about whether or not any of these programs, whether it's public school choice, private school choice, any of those things are appropriate or not. Our legislature and governors, previous governors, have decided that that's the current state of law in Wisconsin.
Right.
I think so. However, because the funding moves through not only our financial system, but also shows up on tax bills as an Oostburg school line, there's a level of transparency that we feel is lacking and is important for people to understand what that number represents.
Correct.
So I also want to share that we're thankful for what we believe is a very positive relationship between Oostburg Public School and our private school partners, particularly with Oostburg Christian School right next door. I consider Brent Turinga a good friend, and we collaborate and talk quite often, as well as our partnership with Sheboygan Christian, other schools as well, right? There are multiple private schools. Right. So again, what I want to emphasize is it's a difficult conversation, but one we feel compelled to have because the average resident of our district doesn't understand what all goes into their tax bill, and that Oostburg school line represents, yes, funding sources for us, and then it also represents private school vouchers that are 100% paid for through the local tax levy. Those are not, if I'm hearing you correctly, so a private school voucher is not, there's no state contribution to that. Is that accurate?
That's for the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program, which Oostburg would be part of. The Milwaukee and Racine programs are funded differently than the Wisconsin Parental Choice, so that they're a little bit different of an anomaly.
You bring up there certainly will be opportunities for us to have additional podcasts, even talking about that. I was recently asked by a resident, why are these funding realities so different in terms of the per pupil funding for an Oostburg student versus a student at Sheboygan Christian, which is very different than a student at Oostburg Christian Grade School, which is different than a special needs student in, there's...
Right.
That's an important topic to talk about, probably not as relevant to today's discussion, but one I'd love to come back to and talk a little bit about. So, to recap so far, we have relatively consistent trajectory of expenses in terms of our overall school budget. Nothing really out of the ordinary there, but we have a very unique year in terms of what our local levy is going to be. One reason is the state budget that was approved did not add additional state funds to offset local property taxpayers. The second one is our properties in our school district increased in value more rapidly than other areas, so we receive less state aid, literally close to $500,000 less of state aid that now is transferred to local taxpayers. And then thirdly, the increase in vouchers, which is fully levied through our local taxpayers.
Yes, those are the three legs of the stool. I think it's important to understand a private school can't tax a municipality, which is why it comes through the public school. We have taxing authority. I can send the municipalities in our district, this is what my levy is going to be. Private schools don't have that ability. So they use the public school avenue to do that, which is why it shows up as Oostburg schools on your tax levy, even though it's going to whichever voucher school those kids are going to.
Right. So when we talked earlier that our board approved a local levy increase of 6.15% as compared to a historical average below 1% for the past 12 to 14 years, that 6.15% may show up differently depending on whether you live in the town of Lima, the town of Holland, the village of Oostburg, because of just valuation differences.
Right.
What about, how can the average resident look at their tax bill and determine what portion of it is supporting private schools through the choice program?
There is not a way to do that. There have been other communities in the state that are trying to get that put on their levy or on their actual tax bills that go to each property taxpayers, but we don't have that in Sheboygan County. So there is no way for you to tell on your property tax bill when you get it. There's no way to tell how much of that is going to voucher schools and how much of that is actually coming to the Oostburg Public School District.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I mean, I knew the answer to that when I was asking you, right? Because it is something that we've been talking about with our legislators. What percent, so if 6.15% is the local levy increase, what percent of the tax levy locally in this year is not going to Oostburg School District, but is going to vouchers?
Our overall levy in the school district is going to be just under $6.4 million, and $910,000 of that is going to voucher schools. Right.
Okay. So, but it also is fair to say that it's not accurate to say when I open up my tax bill and look at Oostburg schools, I can't assume that 15% of the number on my bill is for vouchers. That depends on other variables, depending on which municipality I live in.
The breakdown of the actual levy would be the same percentage in each municipality you live in. Because I give, you live in Lima, you said?
I do.
So I give the clerk from the town of Lima, this is our levy. This much percentage is for the referendum debt. This much percentage is for, and it's the same percentage in each of the municipality sheets that I give to each of the 6 different municipalities that we have.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful. So again, there are so many related discussions that we could have about each of these areas, but the primary goal here is to equip our taxpayers when they get their bill to be able to understand it more, just understand it more, and ask questions, reach out maybe to us if they have questions, or to others when they look at that particular tax bill that will be or has shown up.
I welcome that. These podcasts are fun with you, Kevin, but I much prefer for someone who has specific questions to come to my office and say, Kris, I don't understand this. Help me understand. That's where I love to talk about these kind of things.
Right.
It truly is fascinating, and again, it's convoluted and it's just very, very complex, school finances. So sometimes it's easier for me to meet one-on-one with someone with specific questions rather than generalized, because there's so much variation and it depends where you live.
Right.
Do you live in this municipality or do you live in that? Do you live in the Oostburg School District or do you live in the Cedar Grove School Districts? Because it's different.
Right. So one of the questions that I have had asked or comments that I've had made that I think may be important to address is at times you'll hear the narrative that the public schools are losing a lot of students, so they shouldn't be receiving money for students that they're not educating. And that the implication or the inference is that those students are leaving and going to a private school. And again, we can at least speak to the Oostburg reality in that the opposite has been true for us. We actually, when you examine the students who maybe leave Oostburg School District and go to a private school, and we don't always know, but we don't have many students leaving, or students that come to Oostburg and we're aware that they came from a private school. It's relatively close. We actually have many more students coming to Oostburg from a private school, but a large portion of that are students who, after K-8 experiences at Oostburg Christian, their family makes the decision to have their high school experience here.
Right.
I think the summary just is to make sure that our community knows that all of the things that we're talking about, you and I right now, are per pupil based discussions. We aren't talking about, well, yes, we are talking about general revenue, but the per pupil piece is important. So I want to shift around that focus, and this will take us a little bit away from our tax bills. Again, to our guests, please reach out either to myself or to Kris when you receive your tax bill if you have questions or would like to follow up on any of these things. But the per pupil part is also important, and it's connected to the discussion we just had. So our school board has been talking with the school boards across Sheboygan County. It's the first time that I can remember that Sheboygan County school boards have come together with concerns about the state level of support for public education and concerns about the transparency in terms of how some of the different funding happens for choice programs, and concern around special education, concern around there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. One of the outcomes from that, Kris, and I know you're aware of this, has been a communication, potentially a postcard that may go to district residents, not only in Oostburg, but in Sheboygan Falls, Sheboygan Area School District, that we have collectively agreed to, that describes the changes in state support for public education on a per pupil basis. Our legislators will often talk about overall dollars, and just simply because of inflation, overall dollars do tend to increase. However, that does not translate necessarily into per pupil increases.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about what your Business Managers Association and other stakeholder groups have seen, what the data is telling us about state funding for per pupil in Wisconsin public schools?
Yeah, many times. Now, this year being an anomaly because they're not putting any money into the formula, but many times in recent years especially, the legislature has put more money into that pool for state equalization aid.
To offset local property tax increases.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when I talk about a revenue limit, it's a revenue limit per pupil, just like you're talking about. So when the state says, you can increase the amount you spend by each child by $300, and the school district or the state is going to put in $200 of that, the property taxpayers would have to pick up the other $100, right? If they pick up more of that, let's say now they're going to pay $250 per student, more than they did the prior year. We don't get to spend that $50. That $50 reduces the amount that the property taxpayers have. So when the state says we put more money into we put more money into education than we ever have before, they're putting it into a pool, but the pie per kid isn't getting exponentially
Yeah. So
larger.
Some people may find this
Yeah.
humorous. I chose to go the biology teaching route and not chemistry because my math skills were limited. And we'll let chemistry for the guys like Terry Hendricks that have those good math backgrounds. So in simple terms, we're aware that not our objective outside sources have determined that Wisconsin has dropped from 11th in the country in per pupil funding for public schools to 26th.
Correct.
And we've also dropped in the Midwest from first in the Midwest to second to last in the Midwest in per pupil funding.
Correct.
Above only Iowa. There's an interesting caveat. Iowa actually funds their schools quite differently with some tax realities that even make that difference. So it is fair to say that there has been a change in the state commitment to public education.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
It's also important for us to say that we have had a very positive relationship with our local legislators. So Senator Lemahue, certainly a significant leadership role in the state, Representative Kotzma and now Representative Brill, and some of the change in legislative maps have brought others in. But I would be remiss to not mention that they have listened to us in areas that have helped our district. One of them being Oostburg is a low revenue district, and we're not going to get into that now, but our ability to generate per pupil revenue is less than half of Gibraltar School District in Door County, Nicolay School District to the south. Representative Kotzma and Senator Lemahue were both instrumental in working to address that in the state budget. And that's been important. They also have listened in terms of open enrollment. Oostburg, we believe that our academic outcomes and our focus on our purpose have made us an attractive school district for families that are evaluating their options. And because of that, we have a large number of students that open enroll in. Also a topic for an upcoming podcast because there's a lot to that. So the decisions at the state level, even in this budget, and we believe influenced by Representative Brill, Senator Lemahue, those things have helped Oostburg.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. They've been very beneficial for us.
Right. So we also, and we've had discussions in special ed and so on and so forth. We just believe there's also more work to do. And if you could, what would be like your top 3 suggestions if you were lobbying in the state capitol? And keep it as big picture and simplistic as you can. Maybe what's 1, 2, or 3 suggestions, maybe they're even pie in the sky. What would they be?
My first would be greater support for our special ed kids. When special ed kids, because of their distinct needs, whether they're, academic or behavioral or whatever, they need more support. And so those kids are expensive to take. And there are other school districts that don't take those kids. They're just a little bit more expensive to take to educate. And so more support for special education would be my primary.
Yeah, you and I share that same desire, even at the state level. And the state attempted, and we believe because of the support of Senator Lemahue, Representative Brill, the state attempted in this budget to address that, but only took a first step. And that first step, for things we can talk about differently, really isn't going to wind up bringing much change to us right now.
Right.
So, it may be, our community may be surprised if you're listening to this to know that we have some students that the support and services they require cost well over $100,000, sometimes over $150,000 in support just for a single student with the various needs that they may have. So Senator Lemahue was part of helping to support changes in reimbursement for higher needs students, but there's some other pieces. Let's put special ed funding on the agenda for a separate podcast because I think there's a lot of pieces to that are important. So that would be one. How about another one?
My second choice would be money that a district could use for what they see is really important to be done. A lot of the funds in recent years have been, okay, we're going to allot this much for mental health for students, or we're going to allot there's another pool of money for teacher evaluation systems, and there's another, and for each of those you have to write a grant, and you have to collect the money, you have to spend the money, and then reimburse the money. There's a lot of paperwork and red tape along with those. If we had money that we could use, that our Oostburg School Board and our Oostburg administrative team could best use to best meet the needs of what the kids need in the Oostburg School District, without all the strings attached, let us use the money for what we need it for. That would be my second choice.
Okay. So as I was thinking a little bit about this, I'm right with you in number one, let's share where we can really find common ground regardless of our political affiliation around increased support for special education. I'd like to see continued work around addressing low revenue districts like Oostburg. The reality that just up the road an hour and a half in Door County, there are districts that have more than double the revenue per student is, I understand how it got to be that way. Our listeners probably don't. Give us a call if you want to talk more. So can we address that? Second one for me would be, or third one would be inflationary increases in terms of state support to not pass all that burden on to our local taxpayers for sure. And I think those areas they seem to make sense. So there's a lot here. And again, it's difficult not to go further in detail on some of those things. So we would invite our listeners to give us a call. If you open up your tax bills and some of what we've shared doesn't make sense, there are a lot of things we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the line on the tax bill that says school levy credit, because it's an hour discussion at least, right? We didn't talk about things like some certain and some sufficient. We talked a little bit about revenue limits. We didn't talk about open enrollment, or there's just a lot of pieces. So we would encourage people to give us a call if they have questions, or certainly if you think we didn't represent something clearly, reach out. We'll follow up to try to clarify that. I would invite you, if you're interested, to maybe we'll get another podcast scheduled where we can talk a little bit about special education, maybe a little bit about revenue limits, and get into some of those details that are important for our community. So again, I just thank you for taking the time, because many of us open our tax bills and nobody likes to have to, and when they see that a big line item is Oostburg Schools, if we can help them have just a little deeper understanding of what goes into that, it at least positions them to ask questions, which we can hopefully follow up on. And I hope it also positions and equips them to communicate with their legislators about the value of the Oostburg public school system to our community. You mentioned the basketball game and the musical, the state soccer championship, the Veterans Day program. We do believe that this place is a special part of what allows our community to come together in helping our young people grow into positive contributors to society and the world.
Yeah.
And
we do have so much to be thankful for here. You know, when I think about our school board, like you started out with, and the support that they give us, and really the financially healthy aspect. You see news all over the state of Wisconsin of districts that are having to cut really crucial programs. I'm thankful that we haven't gotten to that point. I'm thankful for the staff we have. I'm thankful that my kids were educated in this high school. I'm thankful that my grandkids are in the elementary school and have just wonderful, fantastic teachers. We have so much to be thankful for.
For sure. We certainly have been blessed. And as some of you are watching this before or after Thanksgiving, we wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving on that note. I'm thankful for you and the time that you've given. Shout out, to, as always, to Lucas Allen, our IT director, on the backside of all of this, making the technology work, and his partner, Logan Davies, allowing us to bring this information to you. So take care and go Dutchman.
Go Dutchman.